There we go. Look at that. I learned it by Friday, buddy. I learned it by Friday. We're all good.
Yeah, man. We still got Monday though, but we got for today. We're good to go. Did you share it? Did you make sure to take yourself off mute? What's going on, brother?
I made sure to take myself off mute. I forgot to share because I was too
It's
focused on the mute. See, that's just brutal. I really should get like a virtual assistant or something to help me share this stuff in the morning. I don't know, brother.
But at least it's Friday, at least it's you don't got to worry about it tomorrow. So what's been going on, man? Like I've been seeing all the amazing, I caught in a little bit of Data Day. The time that I did tune in, I don't know what was going on, but hey, man, you tune into Sales Chatter Live for the unpredictability of this amazing show. What's going on?
Yes. It was it this week or last week? No, this week I think Data Day. Yeah, no, but I think everything went well on Data Day this week, didn't it? Today's Friday. I think it was last week. No, maybe it was this week where my intro was muted, but it was the greatest intro on the planet. I forget. Anyways, it's amazing how that works, brother. Yeah, amazing how that works. So, this chapter, what was your first impression of this chapter? Let's start there.
I say this every week, but this one, I don't want to say it was my favorite chapter. It's more practical. Like I really liked it. I really enjoyed this, but this was the more practical into like understanding. If everybody doesn't know, the chapter is on enlightened relationships. I loved the examples he gave. I truly love the, you really got to seek your own happiness. But I really liked it. We'll get into it a little bit more deep and stuff like that. But here's the thing. This was probably the first one that I took practical, that like I can look for my relationships. So everybody, my friendships, like my friendship with you, my friendship with everybody else, even my relationship with my wife and different people that I kind of meet and be like, okay, well, let me take a step back and kind of not necessarily reanalyze all these relationships, but understand that the one big takeaway that he said for me was that whether we're man or woman, we're not whole. We don't have that duality. So even before we're born, where we don't have that like fullness of us, we're not complete, right? So just thinking about that was like, that was a big eye opener, brother. But what were your thoughts, brother, going through this chapter?
So I mean, I think probably I stuck to one page today just because I can tend to get into the little bits, but when the narrator, so in the audiobook, it's a woman, and she says, true enlightenment is not possible to accept through love, isn't it? Isn't that what makes us whole again? And Eckhart Tolle says, is that true in your experience? Has this happened to you? And she says, not yet, but I know it will happen.
Yeah.
And then he goes back and says, right? Yeah, it's literally like the first thing in the chapter. And he says, he goes back and he says, so in other words, you're waiting for a future event in time to save you. And he goes, isn't that what we've been talking about this whole time?
Yeah.
And I stopped like in my tracks, like full on road runner friggin' feet come to a stop. I went, whoa. Like, okay, so I think we do this all day long.
Mm-hmm.
I know I do, and not necessarily just with relationships. It's like, okay, this is what the future goal is. So let's turn it back to goals for a second. This is what the future goal is. And we're working every day towards it. And in other words, we're waiting for an event in the future to save us.
Yeah.
And this is where full transparency, I start to get confused because I'm like, okay, so am I waiting for that to save me, or is that just the place I know I want to go? And in order to get there, I need to X, Y, and Z in my day every day.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it like, because some gurus, some, trainers, you know, every morning, like write a journal about where you want to go and what you want to do. So when you're writing that journal, are you in the now or are you in the future?
Mm.
And to me, these questions start popping up. And I think they're valid questions. And this is where, you know, you wish you had Eckhart Tolle sitting in front of you and going, okay, so hold on here. Let's dive a little deeper into this because it's important to fully understand and comprehend that the first 6 sentences of this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes back to say salvation is here, in the here and now.
Yeah.
It's not in the future. But future goals are what we strive to achieve. And it's only through the here and now that we get to them. And that's like the biggest message that I took from this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can agree to that standpoint because it's just like, okay, we're reading this and we're like, but then it's just like, okay, well, let me take a step back and actually put this into practicality, right? Because when he says that, that first page did kind of rock me a little bit too, because like we're thinking about, okay, well, what do we want to do? Let's talk about our business. We want our business to hit a X amount or whatever it is. But it's just like, okay, we're kind of trained like, hey, if we want to get to this end goal, we got to do the daily activities, right? If it takes you 100 calls to land one customer and you want 10 customers, you got to make 1,000 calls, right? That's just the way that we kind of like gamify it as you kind of talk about. But when we look at the salvation aspect of it, that's where my mind kind of switches a little bit because even in Hinduism, we talk about like moksha, which is like we go through this endless cycle of rebirth to basically get that moksha, which is salvation. So understanding that there's salvation here and right now, that we can attain that right now instead of like, oh my God, I got to do this, live my life a certain way. But it makes me think about it too because it's like, how realistic is this, or is that like where I'm limited? It's limiting belief, that I can
Yeah.
achieve this from there. So yeah, that's a great discussion to bring up, man. I thought
Yeah.
it definitely thought provoking.
You know, and it continues throughout the entire chapter where he says, however, there is no salvation except in this moment. So again, I think and this is kind of, for me, this chapter is starting to put most of the book into perspective. I don't know if that
Mm.
makes sense or
And
not,
and
but
for everyone who's watching there, we're coming really to the home stretch. I think we've literally got
yeah,
2 more chapters left, right? So this is where they
yeah,
kind of start to wind it down. Like this is where he's written the book, like whatever, and like the publishers and him himself are like, okay, well, it's time to wind down the book, right? And this is kind
mhm,
of like we call this maybe the second act in a movie, right? Where it's just like,
yep,
oh, something gets revealed, and then it's like, and then they kind of finish it, right? So what? Sorry to
yep.
interrupt there.
No, 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 no. Um, it's like, I don't just look at it. I mean, they talk, obviously, the chapter is more talking about love, relationships. I look at it as that, and I look at it as relationships to your future goals, relationships to your future self, all that kind of stuff. And that's where my mind goes as I'm reading and listening.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of put a lot of things into perspective. And I think that subconsciously I knew, um, but I can tell you, it's reading the book is putting it more into practice. And I'll give you a perfect example. So since we started reading the book, um, I find I'm much more aware. Like, for one, taking a shower in the morning. Like when I put my head under the water, I feel every drop on my head and I pay attention to it. And I think this is what, from a layman's terms perspective, paying attention to every moment
Hmm.
is important. Like, you're sitting there typing for a second. As you're typing, just pay attention to what the keys feel like at the tip of your fingers. That's being in the now. Pay attention to the words you use when you reread a sentence that you're about to send somebody. like read it as if you're just writing it for the first time, not as if you're proofreading it. And
Yeah.
I don't know, to me that all of that works back to being in the now. And
Yeah.
even like right now on the call, it's hearing those mic sounds. And I got my computer here, and this is where my camera is, so it's tough for me to see, unless I do one of these and see your face and see
Mhm.
what you're doing. But as I'm looking into the camera, I'm paying attention to the sun in the background over the houses over there,
Yeah.
and what's over by my printer and what's over by my plant, and I'm just more conscious
Yeah.
about being in the now than I ever have been. And this chapter brings it back to, I mean he goes into
Yeah,
some
so let's continue.
depth.
Let's go into the chapter because I feel like we're kind of getting into like the book summary, and we'll do a book summary like once we're kind of finished chapters.
Yeah, because I
But like
am.
let's get yeah, you are yeah. Let's get back into enlightened relationships because I'm like Dan. Let's get into the actual chapter itself,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
I think for me,
I
like
saw
for
you
everyone,
disconnect, it's okay.
no, I'm not just
um
gonna. I'm literally finding like the passage I'm gonna read and stuff like that. But
Go for it.
for us, the enlightened relationships, and he talks the way that he talks about love. That love is really a state of being, and sometimes that love that we kind of look at relationships where it comes from a sense of ego, right? And this is probably gonna get 19 plus here, but he talks about it in the book. He's like the one time that we feel a full sense of like wholeness is when we have sex, because that's that like where we're connecting, man, woman, whatever, but that's where we're actually connecting eternally, and that's not a feeling that we can have forever. We'd like to, but it's not a feeling that we can have. So it's just like he considers that the closest that we can kind of get to heaven, if that makes sense. That
Mhm.
connection where we kind of have either that connection with God or with ourselves and things like that. But it's that to understand that moment in time and then understanding there. Another part that I really like that he talked about relationships is that I think the narrator was talking about love hate relationships, and he doesn't believe in that concept at all. He's like, why would you? He says love, like you said, state of being, but sometimes it comes from the ego mind as well. Like let's say Dan, like I can see with myself, sometimes I get agitated with my wife and she gets agitated with me, and it's just like, do I love her less? No, I don't. But there is that kind of like that balance, and there's certain people who kind of like live in that drama. Like I don't know if you've seen like movies or something like that, like these couples, they get into fights and then they have sex, and then it's like, oh my god, I live for it and everything is good. And it's just like that's not what life was intended to be. And if you're truly looking for that salvation, like I said at the beginning, like I really really love that, even before we're born, we're not whole. And it's just really grasped my mind so much in the terms of that, I'm searching for that wholeness my whole life, but the way that Eckhart actually breaks this down is like, I'll never find that wholeness. Like we said, there's that one situation that you can, but that is not that is it's not realistic to have that for the rest of life. And there was one part that he was kind of talking about, that is on, what is it? It's on page 154, where he talks about, like I said, love is a state of being. Your love is not outside, it is deeply within you. You can never lose it, and it can never leave you. It is not dependent on some other body, or some external form. It is the stillness in your presence. You can feel your own formless and timeless reality as the unmanifested life animates your physical form. And Will Smith said this a couple years ago. I always kind of saw a little short, and they were asking him about relationships in general. Like we always hear about, hey, I'll be 60 one day, my partner will be 40. One day I'll be 30, she'll be 40. Like in terms of that 100 balance. But Will Smith put it in a way that he said, if I am not happy with myself, if I'm not happy externally, internally, how can I bring something to another relationship? Like it's not my responsibility to make my wife happy. And that really made me, because we think of that like protector, right? Like I grew up in a home where, my dad took care of everything. He was the guy in the house, and then, my mom was at home taking care of the kids and things like that. So he was looked at as that protector. But even now, it's just like, if my dad wasn't happy, if he was working 12 hours a day and he came home and he was just, F you guys, go and eat dinner and go in his own room, where's the benefit of that? My dad would come home, he would have his dinner, and then it would be like, okay, what's family time? Like, do I need to take Ryan to soccer practice? Do I need to take Rihanna to like ballet classes? Or are we going to have a movie night in tonight? Just kind of leading with that. So I love when he talks about, love itself is, a state of being and it's not dependent on anybody. It's just like with us right now. You look at everything like the podcast. It's like, are we gonna love when people interact and comment? Of course we are, but is that what we're gonna be clinging to and be like, oh man, like like we put ourselves out to these numbers? Like I'm genuinely having a conversation with you, and I'm loving this because like this is the best form of like expression that we can have. What are some takeaways that you saw from relationships, and did you take a step back at all to kind of like look at your current relationships, like with your kids, with your wife, with your business partners, your friends, everybody in your circle, and be like, okay, well, is this something I need to kind of work on, or is this something that I need to express a little bit more?
Yes, I did. And I actually didn't take it from that part. I took it from the part where he starts talking about addiction.
Hmm.
Having being an ex-alcoholic, um, fighting, smoking and other addictions in my life. He says, every addiction rises from an unconscious refusal to face and move through your own pain. And
Hmm.
I had to think about that, Ryan, because initially it was like, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, no, why would that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, and then I started thinking, right? So when I was smoking, anytime there would be a problem, an issue, I need to go have a smoke.
Hmm.
So you're using that addiction to get through the pain of the issue. Um, I've noticed, and it's wild, but over the last probably 3 weeks in watching shows, in watching just TV with Christine, um, almost every show we've watched, when there's an issue or something dramatic is happening, they reach for a glass of scotch or a drink, and
Hmm.
it's like, I need a drink. And I was, and I remember saying to Christine, just like literally last week, going, why is it on every show when there's an issue, people reach for alcohol?
Yeah.
And because when I was an alcoholic, I immediately, my first like in my head, I'm going, I never did that. Like I never reached for booze. It was
Hmm.
just like I'd be out for lunch with a customer, and I just happened to stay and keep drinking while they went home or went back to work. So it was like it wasn't pain. And then I start thinking about it, and it's like I can't tell you how many days I came home and went, oh man, I had a crap day. Like just nobody talked to me. Just give me a beer.
Yeah.
And it's why do we reach out to those crutches during the pain? And he
Yes.
says, and yeah, he says, every addiction starts and ends with pain. And that
Mhm.
for me was the pinnacle, the climax of the book.
Mhm.
And it's funny because remember I told you I'm kind of going through it. And I'm doing it on audio because my book is highlighted. I
Yep.
went back and looked, and I never highlighted that section when I last read it.
Isn't that crazy, eh?
Interesting, right? Like really
Yeah.
interesting because it's a very powerful section. Obviously, had zero on me when I first read it, but every addiction arises from an unconscious refusal to face and move through your own pain. Every addiction starts and ends with pain. And so that for me was probably the most powerful piece of this chapter. And I think this was like midway through the chapter. Like
Yeah.
it's so powerful because it's like, what pain are you experiencing today?
Yeah.
And what is the crutch that you're using to move through it? And let's bring this back to logistics. And I know today is a book day, but we bring it back to logistics. The pain of hearing no, right, is the crutch is procrastination,
Mhm.
avoidance, right? So you avoid making the cold calls, you avoid making the follow-ups because you're afraid of the pain of hearing no,
Mm.
right? So how do you as a sales rep move through that? Right? It's through that consistent repetition of getting it done and realizing your life's not over if it's a no. Right? But how do we move through the pain of no in our regular life? We just move through it. Do you want pizza tonight? No, I feel like sushi. Okay, that's a no. But it doesn't have the same context. So
Yeah.
that then I start looking at this, and it's love has no opposite. You do not need to wait for others to find consciousness for you to be enlightened. It's like yes, that's, yeah, that's right. Yes, like
Yeah.
I can be as enlightened as I want and come back to the now, and confusing the ego and ego attachment and addictive feeling with love. And this is where I think a lot of these poisonous or relationships happen. Is it's that need, that feeding on drama. And
Mm.
like start if and so for me, when you say, did you start putting this into, I did. And I started thinking about past friends and friends that just feed on this fucking drama and this BS of, life has to be hard, or, listen, we all go through hard times. Don't get me wrong. I've just experienced one of the hardest times you can ever go through. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and I don't have rose colored glasses, Ryan,
Yeah.
but, you know, confusing ego attachment and an addictive feeling with love, right? Like, to me, I mean, all of this is now it's starting to really solidify. And you start thinking of your relationships and saying, okay, like, how is this just another addiction that you're taking, you know what I mean, over from, do you know what I'm saying?
100%. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree with that. Like Dan, like that is probably like the best thought I've heard this whole week. What you've exactly said. I want to go back a little bit. So like we were talking about like addiction and things like that, and like when you're watching a TV show, they go for that drink. So I want to share a
Yeah.
quick story with me. Um, I thought like I used to watch like Mad Men and Suits, and I think I watched them around like the same. Like I think I watched Suits, and then I was like, oh my god, I need a fix. So I went to Mad Men, right, and both great shows. But what I learned from that show is like, all these guys, they drink like scotch and they drink like there's this one drink called an old fashioned, Dan.
Hmm.
And the first time my wife and I went out to Joey's, which is a cool restaurant, there are tons of them across Ontario. Anyways, they had an old fashioned there. So I got the drink and I tried it, and full transparency, I was like, yo, this is garbage. Like it doesn't suit my palate. Like it burns. It doesn't taste like anything. For anybody who doesn't know what an old fashioned is, big ice cube, it's like bourbon, and then they put some bitters, and there's like lime peel, I mean orange peel, and like it seems like it should be a cool drink. But then here's the addiction part that happened to me was that, like I was like, okay, maybe this was a bad one. Then I started making them at home, and I would drink them like at the end of the night because I was like, oh, I need to unwind. I've never been an alcoholic, so like even for now, like I'm maybe if I go to a social event, I maybe like hold one beer kind of guy, right? Like that beer is warm by the time the end of the night is. But there was a time frame where I was just drinking like these, like I was having that old fashioned, and I was like, this does not serve me. Why am I doing this? I genuinely don't enjoy drinking. Like I don't, if I'm gonna go like to a resort, I know when you and Christine go to like a Dominican Republic, I love like the pina coladas, but that's because I love slushies, right? Like the daiquiris
Hmm.
and all that stuff, right? So like I don't really enjoy like the alcohol part, but it's just not for me. But when you're talking about that addiction for pain, it's just like there's other things as well, right? We look at like doomless scrolling. I think I saw today on TikTok, funny enough, on TikTok, right? But they were interviewing a doctor, and he said, give me three things that are hurting like human nature right now. He said the first thing, sugar, doomless scrolling, and not flossing your teeth, because like he was actually, sorry, the three things that affect brain health. So he was saying, by not flossing your teeth, the gum health and all that stuff, sugar, and then do blue light at night, which is your cell phone. And Dan, when you bring that up, it's just like, okay, well, am I serving myself, or am I serving something that I want to be? Right? Because like even for me, it's just like I would love to be a public speaker. What does a public speaker look like? In a suit, pretty chill in front of like thousands of people. But I'm like, no, what if I can do this in t-shirt like Gary Vee? You've taught me that. Yeah, I remember with the train that we met, you were wearing like a polo, and you're like, I don't need to wear a suit. What does that even matter? Like, why do I need to
Does it
give that?
change the information I'm giving you? No.
Doesn't, not at all, right? So I thought that was, I love that you took back like that addiction part, because I definitely did as well, in terms for everybody watching. Like I really love this chapter in terms of like relationships. When he
But he
comes
also
up,
talks about food. He also, like,
yes,
in that
that's
part about
that's where I was
addiction,
going.
oh, okay, go, because I wanted to get to that, because
No,
that's
no, go ahead.
important
I
too.
would love for you to go into that one.
So you talk about sugar, you know, one of
Hmm.
the three things that are horrible for your body. In listening to this chapter, when he talks about food as the addiction to overcome pain, um, I used to use donuts
Hmm.
simply for dopamine, and I never realized it. I just thought I love donuts. But now that I can't taste sugar, with the radiation, I just, for some reason, my taste buds for sugar taste horrible. And that's, kind of a real kick in between the legs, because I was like a candy junkie. Um, but I stopped and I said, okay, well, why did I want 5 donuts every time I pulled into a Tim Hortons parking lot? Or why did I want 15 Timbits? And I was in a search for that dopamine drip. Because every time I would eat them, Ryan, I'd then go, fuck, I need to lose weight. Like with clockwork. And the thing is, I would have to convince myself. Like if my wife and I were going through Tim's just to get her a coffee, I'd have to convince myself in my head, constant conversation from the second I pulled into the parking lot until I was about 3 minutes past the parking lot where turning around would just look stupid. I was convincing myself that I don't need 6 donuts. Like, no joke. And I thought at first it was because I was addicted to donuts, but I was addicted to the sugar, but not because it's sugar, because of what the sugar did to my brain. And the thing is, here's the thing, and here's the big kicker. It would be like that for 3 to 4 minutes. And then I'd be like, I just ate 6 donuts. I'm 200 pounds. I know I've got like a gullet, like a stork here, and I want to get rid of it. I'm not happy with my stomach and I want to get rid of it. Why did I just do that? And then I say to myself, I'm never doing that again. Freaking next day, time I'm in the lineup going, oh, I can't wait for my donuts. Like it's thinking through this. And this chapter is the chapter. If you just got the book, just open up to chapter 8. Start with chapter 8, because I agree. This chapter will bring that, there's so many different addictions in life. People have an addiction to this, Ryan.
Yeah.
Right? An addiction to social media.
The likes, man. The likes and the comments, man. That engagement.
Exactly like Chris Bogue said, right? He goes, you spend so much time, you think this is the video, this is the video, this is the sequence that I'm going to send to customers. This is the video. This is, and it's like, and it blows up in your face.
Yeah.
And it's at, this chapter will teach you to stay enlightened and stay in the now and stay in the positive when those things happen to you. And I think that's the most powerful part of this chapter, is it's not just like the relationship is not just the quote unquote like human perspective of what relationship is. It's relationships to food, to drugs, to alcohol, to love, to drama, and he connects all the dots in this chapter, every single dot.
Yeah. Oh man, that's exactly it. I couldn't agree more. I think everything you just said resonates with everybody who's watching out there. And taking it back to that part that you said, like, I didn't highlight that part with addiction, right? The first time we went around with it. Everyone who's watching there, you're gonna take something completely different from this chapter. And I love with these books where like we said, you could read a line and we're going to automatically think of something, right? Because like you're talking about like the food addiction, like, it reminds me of like when I started my health journey about 6 or 7 weeks ago. Actually, my buddy who's a personal trainer who's helped me put out my program and all that stuff to like get fit and all that stuff, he reminded me at Toastmasters on Wednesday that, hey man, you're 7 weeks into this. And I'm like, what? It feels like I started yesterday. And it's just like that, and we're not saying dopamine hits are not great, but use the right ones, the ones that are like going for a walk, or like, that dopamine drip when you get from like hitting a new PR record in the gym. Find the healthy ones and trade that time off. Right. Because like one thing that I've kind of learned was when I was watching a podcast this morning, was that, okay, well, with our podcast, it's like people think that I need to post. People think I need to be scrolling. He's like, no. Spend 15 to 30 minutes a day of like engaging with other people. Engage with the people. You're going to love this one, Dan, because this came up in the video. But he said, create your dream 100, which is from Russell Brunson at ClickFunnels. Create your dream 100 of, this was in terms of podcasting. So everybody out there, think of in logistics, think of your 100 dream customers, the companies you want to work with, the people you want to work with. So for me, from being like a podcaster and content creator, I'm thinking about the 50 companies and 50 people that I would want to have on my podcast. But for my logistics business, even for Bridger, it's like, who are the dream 100 that we want to work with, and how can we make that happen and engage? like go and comment. Don't like leave like LOL, like, oh my God, that's so me. Like have thoughtful conversations. And those are the ways that are important. Dan, earlier on, you were talking about, relationships. Are they self-serving for you? Like there's certain ones that have drama. What I've kind of learned when I was listening to that podcast as well is like, if I didn't reach out to you or have a conversation with you during the pandemic, then I can mute you on like these social channels. Like there's so many people that I have from like my high school, even my elementary school. I don't talk to them. I see like their kids, I see their family, all that stuff, but there's nothing there. So I'm just going to mute that. I'm not going to unfriend them because I don't want to be a jerk. Like, that's still something that I'm working on with my social anxiety. But when it comes back to like anybody who picks up this book, go to chapter 8, like you said, Dan. I couldn't agree more. This is, like I said, it's probably one of my favorite chapters. And it gives me that actual perspective of like, these are things I can do today.
Yeah. And shifts your perspective if you don't have one. Right. Like if you're subconsciously, just wandering, might not think you're wandering, but this chapter starts to put a lot of things into perspective that way. 100%. 100%. That's a mic drop, brother. You did that.
No, I was gonna say the one you did was a mic drop, man. I was ready for it. I was like, no,
you should have hit the outro. Yeah. Just right there. As soon as I think.
Give us another mic drop, brother. Give us another mic drop, and I'll do it.
I mean, I stopped writing after that, brother, to be completely transparent, because I was like, and I listened to the rest of the chapter. I'm like, yeah, nothing is as powerful to me. That was the most powerful part, right? So maybe we'll just do this. Every pain or every addiction starts and ends with pain. So analyze everything you're doing just over the next 2 days and find out what triggers make you go to what you might not perceive as addiction, but addiction. Like we said here, we gave you examples, when there's troubling times, you go out for a smoke. When there's troubling times, you grab a drink. When you've had a rough day, you do this. When you've had a rough day, you do that. What if, and again, here's my thought process on it. If those are defeating addictions that can hurt you, why not switch it up? When you've had a rough day, go to the gym. And just you can go to the gym and you can run flat out for 30 seconds, if you can even make it to 30 seconds, and you won't believe the just de-stress that happens. And I'm going to say from stress, because I think most of us have addictions that stem from stress, not, just the wind's blowing the wrong way. There's something that stresses you out about it. So that's when that kicks in. Analyze your day today and figure out what is that pain that you're trying to cover up, and make that your first priority to address it. That would be what I would consider kind of and I know that wasn't as powerful as my original.
No, that was powerful. I was just say that was a pen drop, like you just said, So,
yeah, pen drop. There you go.
There we go. I think we both did it.